Ugritone podcast. It is your co-host Ron D. Rog joining with Aaron Cloutier.
Hello.
How the hell are you, man?
Oh, I was mid-sip. I'm good. I am fighting the fatigue right now with matcha, and and I'm waiting for that to kick in. So hopefully, I will have a bit more personality within the next 10 minutes or so. But I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, that's good. Just getting ready for the 4th of July weekend. Actually, I'm smoking some ribs right now in my pellet grill, and that's nice. Amazing. You don't have to worry. Just stick them in and, cook at like 200 degrees for 4 hours, and out they come. And yeah,
that's usually pretty good. Yeah.
And just trying to get shit ready for because I'm not sure if we're leaving tonight or today or tomorrow morning. Just really going to my in-laws. They live out in the countryside, so should be nice.
Yeah, definitely. I'm getting out myself, but not for the holiday. I actually keep forgetting the holiday is like around the corner. I'm like going on a kind of a solo person vacation, like out in the woods, like well, it's like a campground type of thing. So it's basically me in a cabin alone without any devices and just sorting through personal business.
Yeah. Whereabouts you heading?
Upstate New York. So I believe it's Roscoe, New York. I think it's near the Catskills, I believe.
Okay, so is that like in the Finger Lakes area, or
want to say
like Rochester?
Yeah, I want to say it's closer to White Plains, that whole area, I believe. Don't quote me on that though. I don't know my logistics at all. But I believe it.
So that would be more like Albany.
Not that far up, actually. I want to say, well, it's at least 2 hours away from me, where I am in New Jersey. I know that much. And
yeah.
I'm praying that my car can handle the drive. My zombie queen has treated me well, but she may die on this one, so we'll see.
Yeah. Oh, it shouldn't be too bad. Like if it's not Lake Placid or up in the Adirondack mountains, you shouldn't need a Silverado to get to your destination.
True.
But now that the cat's out of the bag, it is the 4th of July weekend, and we wish you all, I'm not sure when the episode's coming out, to all of our listeners in the good old US of A, a happy 4th of July. Stay safe and enjoy responsibly. But today we'll be talking about, we kind of touched this briefly in the previous, but today the whole episode is going to be about producers. What is a producer? What does a producer do? And sort of like debunking some of the common myths that surrounds the word producer, and possibly laying down some pretty good examples of where the production and the role of a producer could have maybe saved a record, made a record, or quite possibly destroyed a record. So
fun
stuff. Yeah. Should we start this whole thing just defining what is the primary role of a producer?
Sure. Yeah.
So what do you got?
So from my perspective, the role of a producer is different these days than when the producers first, started out, right? Like this is my rough, very crude explanation, but the role of the producer way back when used to be the guy who would book the studio time, make sure the band was there, et cetera, et cetera. They would handle more of the logistics and the more of the scheduling and all that sort of stuff, and basically making sure that the artist wasn't distracted by anything, all that sort of stuff. And now these days, to me, the role of the producer is a lot more creative, and they're essentially responsible for, anything from shaping the songs while working with bands and artists in the studio to just getting the best performances out of the artist, helping with, dealing with any issues like writer's block or anything like that.
Yeah.
And, at other times, they're just there. They're almost there to stay out of the way as far as the vision of the band. They're basically there to just convey the vision of the band in the best possible way,
Yeah. I mean, I could not have said it better. That's, I think, pretty much of what a producer should do. Like you mentioned, like the early days of like Sam Phillips and the Sun Studio, and gonna have to take a wild guess and say Memphis. To like Sir George Martin with the Beatles, with a little added feature that those guys they just understood how the tape deck works and how so it's kind of like like being a host for the recording session, right, rather than telling the artist what to do, I think.
Right. Basically like the ringleader.
Yeah. Handling more of like the administrative tasks than to handle the so-called artistic vision, and when you said like the word is rather new, it hasn't really been like 50s and 60s, like was that a producer, or was that just like a guy who would get me a fruit basket, like he would sort of be like the running man, the assistant, the slave engineer that we have these days, the interns,
right,
handling the so it's and the same as like a mix engineer. It didn't really exist up until maybe, I'm thinking like Eddie Kramer, or some say like Bob Clearmountain was like the original mix engineer who just really put things into place.
I'm not familiar.
And before that, it was just some sort of, I'd say Eddie Kramer was more of a like, I'm just gonna give birth from start to finish. I'm not gonna leave at any phase, except for maybe mastering. But yeah, it's a producer. I watched a TV movie about a band called Def Leppard, which you hopefully have heard of, and so they had a section where they started recording, I believe it was Pyromania, or the first bringing on the High and Dry, that's it. And he kind of explained himself as like, I'm just a map to guide you to the treasure. And so the artist is basically just a treasure hunter, and the producer is just a map. And there might be the big jackpot somewhere out there somewhere in the distance, or they might go like, well, we dug up a hole in the wrong place and we only came up with like 50 gold coins or something like that,
right, versus
like of an entire boat made out of gold. But yeah, it's the role of the producer is in some cases like it's almost like a babysitter.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're working with I mean, I watched the Garza podcast, the guitar player of Suicide Silence, when he was interviewing Ross Robinson.
Oh wow!
And it's the sessions of those like '90s Korn albums.
Right.
They actually sounded like a babysitter, that he had to be a babysitter, and in some of the cases they got pretty wild.
I'd imagine. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
I've heard he's pretty crazy though in the studio anyway. Like I've heard like he's been really extreme. Like when he was working with Slipknot, like he was like throwing like potted plants at them and shit like that, like
trying to get the aggro.
Yeah, exactly. Like He's I guess it's along the lines of like what a method actor would do. It'd be like it's like a bunch of method actors working together. It's like, hit me. I want to feel it for the scene. Like, I guess that kind of thing. And it makes me wonder if he does that to every single band. I don't know.
I mean, if you got an army of lawyers, you know, just kind of doing a bunch of NDAs on top of NDAs, like what happens here stays here, and what ends up on the record, by all means necessary, kind of type of. And I think, you know, that kind of thing, to a sense, should probably make a comeback, because it's like you can't really. You can correct the pitch, and kind of, if you double yourself, you can get a little more weight onto it. But the feel, we don't really have like a feel corrector. Make this sound more dramatic,
right?
Or make my vibrato a bit more Roy Orbison-ish or something. So what's that? There's. And so, but yeah, a producer is something that translates codes to the. So, what the idea of a songwriter, and then he just kind of digests it and poops it out, and out comes something. You know.
Yeah.
That makes no sense, but it also kind of makes sense.
Well, it's like what you said about a producer being, you know, a babysitter, because I definitely think that, like, being in the creative headspace, it's almost like you have to shut off that, you know, adult part of your brain, if that makes sense, like the practical, pragmatic. Like, oh God, I have to pick up the dry cleaning today, or oh God, did I pay my phone bill? All that sort of stuff. Like, you have to turn all of that off so that you're focusing on this one creative outcome. And it's kind of the kind of high that you get from creating something. I don't know. It makes me feel emotionally younger than I am, I guess. Whenever I talk about music, I get really excited, and I've had people tell me, like, you seem younger than you are, which I guess these days I would take as a compliment, but like, I never really realized that until somebody pointed it out. It's like, yeah, it's because there's this excitement. There's this, you know, the thing that you're trying to capture in the studio is that creative spontaneity. So if you do that, or in order to facilitate that, rather, you need some kind of, you know, shepherd, or, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Ringleader, or just, you know, chaperone's a good way to put it, right? Just somebody to kind of protect you from the outside world and any distractions and any temptations. So the guy to lock up your phones, the guy to make sure the girlfriends don't come by, the guy or girl, rather. This gender is not specific in this role, right? But like, just to eliminate any kind of distractions, anything to detract from the actual, you know, process itself, and just helping to nurture that. So yeah, I totally agree that should be the role of the producer. I mean, it certainly evolved from where it started, and, you know, some people might say it continues to evolve, and other people have different definitions of what a producer is, which I don't necessarily agree with, but, you know, whichever side.
Well, should we touch base with that next? Like, the word producer, it's almost like the word legend or classic.
In that it's getting overused.
Dirty deeds have done dirt cheap. Kind of like, I'm not saying that they're irrelevant words anymore, but they've definitely seen some sort of inflation in my point of view.
Like they're overused and not accurately. Like the word amazing. Like saying everything's amazing all the time. Louis C.K. has a great bit on the word amazing. It's like that. It's like, or
Curated.
Genius is another
God, I
one
hate
too.
that word.
You hate genius?
No, I said the word curated.
Yeah, no, you do.
It's almost like it's the word moist for me. Curated. I'm like, ugh. Why trying to make yourself sound so mysterious? It's just did you just curate the fruits? I went to a Safeway and you're just like curated the avocados.
Yeah, we curated this entire produce section.
This is ripe. This will be ripe in 3 days. Kind of, but that's not the point. The point is what isn't about production, and I shall cast the first stone. Programming in MIDI loops, I don't think it's about production. I think that's the task for the engineer, or like in these days there's I don't know, like in the old days there was the crew member in the audio or the studio who handled production or like programming the sorry, did I say production? Programming, like programming the Fairlights and all these things that required certain level of technical excellency in order to operate. And so I would just put it under that. It's more like the producer, say like Quincy Jones. He did not touch the Fairlight himself. He would just like say like make like
right.
Like, you know, he told the guy to do that, and then he'd be like, no, make it groove a little, make it a little looser, make it a little tighter, make the hi-hat thing a little looser or something. And that, I think, is a whole nother department, you know, that the producer shouldn't really care too much about. Or, I mean, but then again, like you said, it's a ever evolving thing where you can't hire a guy who just programs the drum MIDI or the loops anymore. So you kind of have to condense the roles a little bit. But I'm also thinking that may be some like technical aspect first approach in the production, you know, like we're just focusing on the 909s to make it like, no, that shouldn't really be that shouldn't be the first, like the primary concern when you're talking about production. It's what happens to the song.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to piggyback on that, right? Because you're saying, you know, if you are programming loops and all that sort of stuff, I guess it would all depend at what stage of the process you're doing that, right? If you're just building stuff from scratch, if you're starting with just building a beat or building a loop, to me that's just the songwriting process, right? Like that has nothing to do with the production. Like to me, the production, all right, so if like the song is the cake, then the production's the frosting. You know, you can't like, I mean, I guess you could have frosting on the bottom, but like you can't enhance what doesn't exist. And to me, the role of a producer is to do just that, is to enhance in whatever way that means, whether if it's like the best performances or the best sounds, or even just adding little like little additions, like maybe little overdubs here and there, like, hey, let's try this arrangement over here, let's add a synth in this part, let's automate things so it builds up to a crescendo, all that sort of stuff, let's add vocal harmonies, let's do whatever. But it's like you can't get to that point until you write the music, until you write the song. So yeah, to me, like beat production, beat programming and all that sort of stuff ties in with songwriting, because like right now we're talking mostly about hip hop and electronic music, right? When we think loops, obviously there are some loops in heavier music and whatnot, but it's the same thing with like hip hop, right? You can't have the rhyme without the beat. I mean, it's usually if somebody wants to write to something, they hire somebody to write them a beat so they can rhyme over it. That's songwriting. Like,
I mean, if you look at Dr. Dre, when he's in the studio, he's all about the feel and the delivery. Like, there's some guy who's, make that snare a little fatter, but it's not Dre's. It's like boosted 200K. It's like, you're the engineer. You go figure it out.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to keep this momentum going.
Right.
You know? And I think that's a very, like, producers shouldn't really care too much about which, like, mic cables, which mics we're using. That should be just the relationship between the engineer
Absolutely.
and the producer to kind of like, that sounds a little flat. Like, that might be the only thing the producer would say, like, try a different thing. Okay, that sounds good. But like, the producer shouldn't care whether it's a AK414 or a U87, U67, U47 FET. None of that should really matter to a producer firsthand.
Right. And
another thing that I've come across a lot is that producing the snare tone, or like the snare just doesn't sound right. You take up production, say The Closing Time by Semisonic. I think that song is extremely well produced, but I couldn't tell you what the snare sounds like.
Yeah, I couldn't either.
Or say a theme from New York, New York, Frank Sinatra. Brilliantly produced, or should I say arranged song, delivery spot on. I can tell you, like, what kind of a snare they used. Like, does that even matter? You know, it's
right. I mean,
or the producers of those two great songs, they were all about, like, are people going to listen to it in 2021? And if you ask me, I mean, the answer is yes.
Right. I mean, that's what I love about a producer like Rick Rubin, because his perspective, as like what he said in interviews and all that, is that he always approaches a project from the perspective of a listener, like always. Like, it's not even as a creative type. He's approaching it from the perspective of, you know, will this move me as a listener? Will this sound good to me? And he doesn't really concern himself with all the, well, certainly not with all the technical aspects, because he's not really the engineer, to my understanding. And even less so, he kind of lets the band do their thing. Like, I'm thinking about like the Divine Intervention record from Slayer, where I think he was working with Tom on vocals, and that was about it. Like, he let Carrie and Jeff kind of dial in their guitar tones, and I'm not sure what was going on with the drums and all that sort of stuff, but like, he would give the final say as a listener. He'd be like, all right, yeah, the vibe is there, that type of thing. And that, I think that's such a great perspective to have, and it's really important, and it's really
Absolutely
challenging to switch, you know, if you're doing both things, if you're doing like the creative, you know. That's why there's the whole term producer is so loose. But like, you could approach it where you're in the chair and you're making creative decisions and all that sort of stuff, or you could just be letting the band do their own thing and you're the one giving your opinion. That's still producing, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should jump into the thing, like different schools of production next, because it's myself, I'm not sure if as an artist or even as a member of the staff, if I would like to be in a process, say like the Mutt Lange and Phil Spector's, who literally line by line, sometimes even vowel by vowel, deconstructed the whole thing. But man, it's like the overall, every single Mutt Lange produced album or single is just so amazing. They just withstood the test of time just so damn well. Like, if I listen to Hysteria by Def Leppard, it's like, sure, the sound, it might sound a little cheesy with all the 80s like drums and the big chorusy guitars and kind of like the overall theme of the song, but it's still like, people, when you put on Pour Some Sugar on Me, everybody just starts to jiggle to the song. You know, it's like it's timeless. But when you think of like, I'm not sure like how much of that was like the record took 4 years to make. How much of that was because of Mutt's like, no, do it again, kind of, because I think the part of it was Rick's accident as well, and they just didn't want to take a year off and maybe, you know, finish this, so they were kind of like forcing themselves to get something done,
right? And
it ended up taking 4 years total. But it's like all those tiny hooks in there, like there's not a dull second. There's always something like you know, those risers and like reverse snare verbs, or just something interesting happening with the vocals, or maybe little sparkles here and there.
Exactly. Yeah, just maintaining the interest throughout the entire song. That's what a producer.
Yeah. But it's like, then again, like Phil Spector, he kind of invented that, or pioneered, whereas like Mutt Lange just was basically a prodigy of Phil Spector's the wall of sound, and just like everything has to, like, it's almost like turning the studio into an instrument,
right?
In a way where it's like we could fake I wouldn't say fake, but enhance certain things in the studio that you can't do live, because you can't tell the crowd to be like, shut up, or this delay will not sound good. You know, so
yeah,
I don't know, that would be a cool, like a new energy for a front man. It's like, shut up, you're not hearing the snare sample.
If anybody could do it, I feel like Devin Townsend could do that. He could get away with that.
Yeah, Tool.
Yeah, Tool as well, for sure. God, yeah, I forget who always produces the Tool albums. Is it Sylvia Massey? Did she engineer those? I totally forget.
She would probably be a producer of a handful. I'm thinking he's a guy who did like a bunch of like skate punk, like Pennywise and Offspring. Joe Barresi, I believe.
Wait. Yeah. Let me see.
He's like Tool is they can work with anyone, but like Joe Barresi, Sylvia Massey. But we could talk about that next, because I think like they're in a category of their own. But like the polar opposite for this Phil Spector, Mutt Lange, to me, the name that I could think of would be Steve Albini.
Oh yeah,
did the In Utero, who's all about like, we can't capture what's not here, and if the band's not here, we can't capture. So it's more like the raw power kind of, where the studio is just an environment to capture it. It's right. not like an instrument.
It's much more of a punk rock aesthetic, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It goes without saying.
And I feel there's definitely but there's definitely a place for all that, because I think we've been, especially in the new millennium, we've been more or less kind of accepted the Mutt Lange, Phil Spector style as the norm, where everything is like, it doesn't even matter what you feel when you're singing this, because we can do a whole bunch of shit, you know, put on top of it and all that. So and then there's guys like Steve who just, hey, we're doing it old school, and it's all about the take rather than the technical enhancement or
perfection,
trying to put something in there that's not in there, you know. I would say oh,
sorry, I can't remember who said this, but you know, like when working with a song, like there's a big difference between getting it perfect and getting it right. You know, like getting it right is just like, you know, making sure that the vibe is there, right? And that's not necessarily going to be perfect. I mean, like Dave Lombardo, for example, he doesn't play in a way where it sounds like it's completely gridded. It's loose. It's loose and tight at the same time. He's such an anomaly in that sense to me. But like he has this wild vibe, like this wild loose vibe that if you quantize that, it would just not sound like him. And that happened to Joey Jordison too, where he had a Lombardo vibe in the beginning, and then he started playing to a click for what was it? All Hope Is Gone, I think. And it didn't even sound like the same band.
Yep, that's very true. Like Lombardo, if like anybody can go to YouTube and just search for Angel of Death or Raining Blood drum track, and you hear the original. And I've certainly used that a lot for referencing, you know, trying to train your ears to when we did the speed metal, like that was a huge help because I could like, oh, okay, so it's like it's not that clicky, but then you're like comparing like, oh, the bass drum actually does have a click or like the element to it, so it's very good for ear training. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like it's for the modern producer in metal, you probably send them home. It's like you can't play double bass like that. That's not.
No, you sound too much like a human being. We can't have that on a metal production. It's such a bummer.
But I mean, it would be, it would be way too loose for this. Like if you're gonna edit and time stretch and you know that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, Joey Jordison.
Yeah.
And then David, I keep forgetting his last name, the original drummer for Korn, had kind of the same thing where it's like the fills do kind of overlap, but then always say like like, you know.
Yeah, there's this wild looseness to it, but it totally worked.
Yeah. And that's something like you listen to Blind by Korn.
Yeah.
That wouldn't work if everything was tight. Like it's just those macro, and same with like Cannibal Corpse. That's why I think I kind of like when I hear their newer stuff, it's like this is almost too good, you know. Whereas like take like Hammer Smash Face from the Tomb of the Mutilated, it's there's those micro time unintended time signature changes where it's wheezy woozy, speeds up, slows down, kind of.
Right. I mean, that runs rampant with like so much old school metal, especially like, I forget what like Sweden, it might have been Dismember, or I can't remember, but there was you know, there's a skank beat, and all of a sudden like it starts speeding up. Like he's just like, oh God, I can't stop, like that kind of thing, which is cool. You know, it's just like it sounds real. It sounds like a human performance, and I feel like we're hitting a ceiling, man, where like it's gonna get so, you know. I mean, that's why I love productions like The Violent Sleep of Reason from Meshuggah, where it still sounds big and huge and well produced and whatnot, and is competitive with everything else out there today. But, you know, the fact that they just did it all together in the room, and, you know, they got everything tight as a band, and they were recorded as a band. I mean, you can totally tell the difference in the performances when you compare it to a record like Kolos, if I'm pronouncing it right. I don't even know.
Yep.
So it's like, it makes all the difference, man. It's great.
Yeah, but you know what was kind of interesting from the aftermath of well, so far it's the latest Meshuggah release, but how many gent bands actually follow the trend of like, hey, let's do this live?
Yeah,
I don't know. I think Periphery might have their latest may have been a bit more live, but kind of goes to show, man, it's certain styles just can't do live. And I think Meshuggah in that sense like is a very bad gent band because they just completely renounce the word that they basically invented. So I think they're playing in a different ballpark.
I would do the same thing as them if I were them, you know, because it's like what are you calling this? I mean, I read interviews with them, and they're just like they just kind of like shrug their shoulders, and they're like, "Well, this is just how we see music." It's like, yeah.
But it's like the same as I remember yesterday. I was driving somewhere, and then I saw a car in front of me, which had a sticker of like Frontline Hero. So it's kind of like a no self. Heroes they're not created by yourself. Like someone has to give that title to you. And all the so-called heroes that I know, I'm not a hero. I had to act at the right time, to save a life or, make something better for someone else. Or it's like, you just can't wrap that. So around you, like I'm a hero.
No, agreed. It's
I don't know.
Title
So I guess
place on you for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, just like a trend.
And that's why it's like, and that's why Meshuggah, we're just guys from Sweden who just make our music, and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, that said, like I am super happy that they get the recognition that they deserve because, they do. Like, how ahead of their time were they when they came out? Like, I still to this day, I think I bought Chaosphere when it came out in '98, and it still doesn't get old to me. Every time I put it on. And by the way, the reason because of that is that the performances, I mean, they're not super pristine, right? They're super tight, and they still sound, like that mechanical whole style that they have. But there's such a rawness to it, and there's just such an aggression going on that I feel is lacking in modern metal production big time. Even when people try to make it more aggressive, they make it more aggressive with like the sounds rather than the performances to me.
I would have to agree with you there.
Yeah, it's a bummer.
But we briefly touched who I would really love to see produce Meshuggah, Sylvia Massey.
Oh wow,
she's kind of like the third style of production where she's just so it's like let's play bass through a pickle. It's like the school of like why the fuck not, it's her and Joe Barresi who are like, okay, we got to put after the day's work is done, then we can play your guitar through a potato, and that's like the other half of where I'm not sure if it's going to make it there, but hey, go record that Rain on a Tin Roof and then put it through a loop pedal and turn it into, that like wild, untamed creativity that.
Yeah, man.
It's like, I mean, we could achieve the similar sound with the plugin or through like an Axe Effects preset, but just going through that extra mile to say like, holy shit, like that is an actual. You can't hear the pickle, but it's through a pickle, so.
Yeah, and I think just the process of actually doing it and experiencing it, right? I think just helps them get the brain going in a way that's a lot more involved than selecting a preset and all that.
Yeah, and it just goes to show like how big their original love for the craft is, because if you're just say like you're what's that team that the Florida Georgia line and the guys are part of the songwriting production kind of like your day job is to write hits,
right?
And we've kind of discovered the formula, at least for Florida Georgia line, there's the pickup truck, girls, sunshine, and some sort of alcoholic drink reference. Yeah, I mean, it works. I'm not gonna say when the song "Cruise" comes up that I'm not gonna be like, oh, this is it's nice and easy listening. When you're heading to a lake, that might be the right song in certain occasions, but
I'll take your word for it.
I don't know, I just don't know how much love there is every time you go there. It's like, I gotta write 4 top 40 hit singles today and produce it and just or just sell them to the highest bidder.
Right. Yeah.
It's like Sylvia Massey goes to work, and it's like, I was reading an article on the plane, and you could actually put a guitar tube through this and that and use a hair dryer to do distortion. And it's like, what?
Yeah. Or when
but that's
who recorded Paranoid from Black Sabbath, the album? I forget who did
that. Is the so-called gray zone for me that I haven't really studied the early 70s. Say it was probably someone. I don't think it was Eddie Kramer, because I think they were still working out of England at the time.
Yeah, I'm not sure who it is. I'm gonna have to go back and read up on that. But basically,
we don't have a fact checker at our show, so we can't. Let us know in the comments.
Whoever it was put Ozzy in front of behind a fan while they were doing Iron Man, and he just did that whole "I am Iron Man," and that's the effect that came from it, allegedly, right?
That is, I've always wondered how that was created, but it makes total sense.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, it's just not anything I would ever think to do, and just so I don't know, man. That's such a unique sound. I don't think I've heard that anywhere else, right? So there's something to be said for that.
Yeah.
God, what's the guy's name who did the last Meshuggah record? I can't remember off the top of my head. It's
Tue Madsen.
Yes. How I forget if he actually recorded them in his swimming pool, but he had that part of the studio that was just a giant giant empty swimming pool, because he loved the specific acoustics that it generated, right? And that's crazy. Who would I would never think to do that. I would be I guess, well, I barely consider myself an engineer anyway when it comes to that, so I would probably just be let's just get a regular drum studio and whatever.
I mean, and it's for me, creating the Ugritone drums, I kind of have more of that Sylvia Massey approach to that. So this one project that I got coming up this summer, I bought those quick tubes, that are being used to form concrete. So if you're doing a outdoor plumbing or something, or you need to run some cables in the ground, so they're basically, I think they're cardboard or something, but because they come in 8 inches, 10 inches, 12 inches and something, I was like, well, you could probably build drum shells out of those. So, and then I saw some guy who built one, I think it was a snare, I believe, and sound like a snare. So now I'm just trying to do something creative with them and see how they sound like. And awesome. So that's still very much of even though these days Ugritone does have a budget for release, so we don't have to just pick whatever we have, so we're sort of in the comfort zone, but I still want to include that. It's what if it's not a snare at all,
right?
But it might sound like a snare, too. And it's important to incorporate that angle into the project as well.
I agree. I mean, I would imagine every producer there just needs to balance out, you know, the other side of things. I mean, because it's a service-based profession, right? Your job is to serve other people. So I would imagine, that little something at the end is for them, like, hey, let's try this, let's try this. Makes sense.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, you think of it like, so like P Diddy, everybody knows he's a king of throwing parties in like the New York City area. If you go to a P Diddy's party, you're somebody. But if you think of it this way, like, sure, there's a fountain of champagne, there's the stack of money that you can swim in, there's that. But if it's the same year after year, even though it's like, holy shit, there's P Diddy's party, there's Donald Trump, there's fucking Magic Johnson in there's but if none of that changes throughout the years, if it's the same lavish party year after year, then it's like, are people after like 10 years gonna be excited about it, or does Diddy still want to throw the party once, like, every year it's the same?
Right. True. Very true. Yeah.
So that's kind of like just trying to, when you're making experiences for your clients and perhaps for yourself as well as a producer or whoever's like facilitating the session, you should really like try to break out of the bubble of comfort.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Now and then,
just the routine, the process.
Yeah.
It's funny.
And the thing is, because...
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say...
Yeah, like, I was... Oh.
The Zoom delay. No. The Zoom delay.
Yeah, it's like a Canadian standoff. Oh, sorry. No, sorry. But yeah, what I was going to say... Yeah. What I was going to say shortly was that, and the more experience you gain from the nitty gritty, like connecting cables and, okay, this is going to sound good no matter what, then the whole like experimentation also gets easier, because that at the end of the day, it's just electricity that goes through the circuit. There's no magic, so, or that certain hertz frequencies, act a certain way, and that everything's a frequency in the world, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, well, with that in mind, right? I remember having a conversation with a well enough known engineer. And I was talking to him about just balancing out like the mixing process with the creative process. But in his perspective, like, it's all about, adhering to a specific structure during the mixing process, which I agree to a certain point, like to a certain aspect, because, it keeps you from getting hung up on things, and it just keeps you moving, keeps you making decisions and all that sort of stuff to achieve a reliable outcome. But he says that, he reserved, like, that's also the only place where the creativity lies, which I guess I understand, but at the same time, I don't think I quite understand, because it's like, well, if everything is so, do this first, do this like this, do this, move on, it just seems so not creative to me. It just seems like you're following a step-by-step plan. And I'm like, well, where does the creativity come into play? Like, at what point does it actually get creative? Are you getting creative with your EQ moves at the end of the mix? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Honestly, man, like, I guess mixing is creative in the sense that it's like painting with sound, right? But if you have like this rigid kind of step-by-step method of doing it, it's like, I don't know, man. It just doesn't feel very creative. It just feels like you're being very technical, which to me is.
And I think that's part of I think that's what the mixing process is. It's not being creative in that, unless you're trying to make the mix that's going to land you your next gig. But if you're just pommeling through the projects and the songs, I think it's the same as like if it's not there, it's not my job to add it there. Kind of like it should have been producer's choice to like, okay, the second verse is identical to the first verse. There's nothing different except the lyrics go different, and that is something that the producer should say, like, hey, how about we, like, one thing about Mutt Lange, the amount when the song kicks in, the first verse, what does he have in the very first verse? These are numerous occasions. Numerous songs have the same. He only has the lead vocal, bass, and drums. There's nothing else in the first verse. Mm-hmm. You listen to Breathless by the Corrs. There's nothing but vocal, bass, and drums. And then it kind of builds up from there. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Def Leppard's Gods of War. There's the bass, drums, vocals. Mm-hmm. And then like a bunch of Shania Twain stuff, Bryan Adams, the same thing. So it's kind of, you first have the hook of like the lush everything, and then you take it down so you have somewhere to go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like, I mean, it's so important to have those dynamics built into the song, right? Because it's so much easier to add than it is to take away. So especially with like pop music, right? You have to start with the chorus in mind. That's the peak of the mountain. Like, it can't get any bigger than that. So you have to build around that. And from there, you're just spending your time looking at ways at how you can spice up, how to build tension in the pre-chorus, or, changing, from a hi-hat to a ride in certain parts, right? To add little variations to break up the monotony. And if the second verse is the same as the first verse, like you said, it's like little sprinkles, like maybe maybe there's some synth, maybe there's some extra percussion, maybe there's harmonies, something like that. But that's huge. It's like and again, like, I don't know, maybe I guess my brain doesn't work this way, but like, I just feel like mixing is not, it's certainly not the level of creative that, writing a song is, or producing a song is, for that matter. I just feel like it takes a different kind of mindset that is reserved for a certain type of person. And to those who are able to be a producer and an engineer at the same time, oh my God, like, like I have a lot of respect for those people, because I don't know how they juggle those different mindsets, or unless they've found a way to integrate them, into a way that's seamless. But I don't know. I'm definitely not a technical person, so it's all Chinese to me.
Yeah. And that's like, sometimes, like you said, Rick Rubin, the effect, like, sometimes the best producers are the guys who can't outperform the artist or the rest of the crew in every way, where it's like, hey, I just have really, I don't know if you've ever watched that show called The Empire.
No.
Which is, I don't know if it's like a mock-up of Dr. Dre or Jay-Z or something, but basically this hip-hop legend building like I have my own skyscraper and shit. But it's his on and off ex-wife, future wife, current wife, Cookie, who, like, she doesn't understand. She's not speaking technical terms. She's more of like I have a really good set of ears. I can, kind of. So I think she's more of like the classic producer. Like, hey, make that longer, and I feel production, in the sense it's being taught, should probably be emphasized more along the lines of like just the less you know about the gear, because the A&R guy and the producer are closer in my point of view than the producer and the engineer.
Yeah, I would say so, you know, and like going back to Rick Rubin, like again, he's taking the perspective of the listener. And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing if you're, you know, trying to reach an audience, is like having somebody with that perspective of an audience member, right? Because if it doesn't move them, nobody's going to give a shit about you. Like,
exactly. I mean, it's kind of like Steely Dan say they have like technically the most perfect sounds and everything, but why is it still not appealing to me? And, like, sure, like Ricky, don't lose the number. I hear freaking 4 times a day when I go drive and put the classic rock on the radio dial, but there's something that does not really, like Toto was a complete late bloomer for me, but then I kind of figured like, holy shit, like I've just been focusing on the wrong things about Toto. Like they can actually write songs, and they're like one of the greatest musical groups of all time.
They're pretty nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody in the band can sing. Everybody in the band can write songs. So they're kind of like the modern Beatles. Well, not so modern. They're like
slightly
50
more
years
modern
in or something.
than the Beatles.
You know?
Slightly more modern than the Beatles. Yeah.
Yeah. Not your average Beatles.
Right.
Or something. But yeah, it's like productions. It's kind of like painting or building a house. Like sometimes, like the most simplest design is the best because it's been road tested for decades, if not centuries. You know.
Right.
So, and then you see these modern abominations. Sometimes I'm like, I don't care if it's energy efficient, but that is an eyesore.
Right.
You know, so it's sometimes like some of the things like science, and you know, it shouldn't be challenged just because it's old. But if you start to see that it doesn't really apply to this world anymore, kind of. So production should be sort of the same thing. Like it's just, let's not make it harder than it is.
Right. And yeah, well, and what you're saying, to my ear at least, it's just saying like, you know, not going to that left brain, like just keeping it intuitive and keeping it like not getting wrapped up in that conscious kind of like technical thinking. Because again, we're talking about emotions here. Like when it comes to music, like no matter what the emotion is, there's going to be, you know, a certain emotion assigned to a typical song or genre or anything like that. And that's what moves people. That's what motivates people to buy music, if they still do these days. And so, like, how are you going to manufacture that consciously? You can't. It's not going to be effective. You know, it's just like you have to approach it from the mindset of like, you know, again, having that childish curiosity and that intuition, and not overthinking it. Just, I mean, and that's a skill unto itself, like developing that trust for your own instincts, because it's not easy at first, but it makes all the difference for sure.
Yeah. And that's actually something that the producer Mutt Lange always, according to there's very little info about Mutt Lange, but there's also a lot of bits and pieces about him. But what he always, this I believe Joe Elliott mentioned this, and when they were recording Hysteria or Pyromania, whatever, Mutt's approach was always like, well, is the guy who's pumping gas in Boise, Idaho going to get this thing?
Yes.
Or is the guy who's, just stocking shelves in Oslo, Norway, going to get what we're, doing here? So he always, even though it was very, probably a grueling process to record with them, but it's always just finding the right, that the person that's not trained
Exactly.
to listen to music in a scientific way, is that person going to get it? Because they're the ones who are buying the records.
Exactly.
If they get it, not like, that's why Steely Dan's not the most successful Toto or Foreigner or something. That's why they're a tad behind like Aerosmith and Def Leppard and AC/DC, because apparently bands who sing about big balls and ball breakers and it's more likely to sell 20 plus million albums, than something that's requires a little bit more finesse.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think, radio wise, Foreigner in particular, definitely, maybe this is more.
Oh, they own the radio. That was a poor example, but
right.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that gave them a certain reputation as like a ballad band. I don't know though. That's just a guess. Like, I've been waiting for a girl like you. All that stuff.
That's true. He actually, have you ever noticed how awfully similar his voice is to Joan Hall? Daryl Hall. They always, when I listen to Hall and Oates and Foreigner, if you listen to that back to back, you probably think like, is that the same vocals?
Yeah, I could see that.
She's a man in her. I want to know what love is.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, never.
That was like way before where like every vocalist was supposed to sound the same, like it is today. Like if you want to sell records, sound like Adele. They all do.
Or they do that like almost like speech impediment style of singing. Like it's supposed to be jazzy, but everybody shouts.
Oh yeah.
Right, and it's like I can't fucking stand that, dude. I cannot stand it.
It hurts.
But yeah,
It's so good, but I don't know like how much more today. We've kind of covered a lot of ground as far as being a producer is. We probably missed the key point, but that's what we do best. We just babble all sorts of stuff, and this is the key point.
yeah.
But in a nutshell, what do you think? What's your hope for all the people that are thinking of becoming producers or are already self-proclaimed producers? What's your message to them?
I would say to turn off that surgeon part of your brain, that fighter pilot, whatever requires you to have a large amount of critical thinking and technical ability or whatever it is. Turn that off and just remember why you got into music in the first place. Like anybody who gets into music is obviously like a fan of music, a music lover, and never forget that perspective and try your best to approach anything that you're doing from that perspective as a songwriter, as a producer, as anything like that, right? And when working with bands, I'd say instead of trying to like develop your own signature sound, I would say just like develop a way to make the band sound like the best representation of themselves, because that will undoubtedly bring in more clients, right? Like, I think at least maybe, having the signature sound is appealing for certain bands where it's like, ooh, if we go work with this guy, it's going to sound like this. but I guess it depends. You know, there are bands like Lamb of God. Lamb of God's a great example, right? Because they worked with Machine, and it was the most produced record that they ever had. And then right after, they came out with Wrath, where they self-produced, and it sounded super raw, and to me, just sounded more accurate as far as them as a band.
Yeah.
They kind of have like done it all in that sense. When Devin Townsend produced as a Palaces Burn, he was more of like the guy cracking the whip, right? Like he was just like the do it again, and with the focus of getting the most, like the tightest performances out of everybody. He wasn't really saying like, hey, let's do this. Like the band itself had everything worked out. So
yeah, well, I was just gonna give you another example of Van Halen. Like how much of that was actually Ted Templeman, and how much of that, like, I still don't understand, like, how can you maintain the same drum sound for over 40 years?
Yeah,
going from analog to digital and like the hybrids in between, and
right. Yeah.
And my guess is Eddie and Alex, you know, they just, well, we're gonna make the sound of Van Halen, and whoever is gonna produce it will just be there to make sure we sing in tune.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, the same as like Lamb of God and Pantera. You know,
Pantera, for sure.
I don't know, like where Terry Dates or what Pantera or a Machine, and my full of shit if I say Josh Wilbur later on produced Lamb of God. So kind of like, where is the sound already there that you don't? It's kind of like buying a prefab home. Hey, it's there. Just go paint it a little bit, but it's still gonna look like a home.
It's a good analogy. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. So basically, in a nutshell, is trust your instincts. Look at things from the perspective as perspective of a listener, rather, and you know, if you can delegate, like if you don't consider yourself an engineer, like find somebody who is, and so that you can actually focus on being a producer. If you feel like you can do both, But just, I would suggest like partition your brain off for different stages of the process. Don't let your producer brain commingle with your engineer brain.
Yeah. So very good points.
That's what I think.
I can't really add anything too extravagant on top of that. I think it's number one, just get the best possible performance, because you can fix pretty much anything else, tuning, timing, but you can't really change the absurdity. If there's something that did not belong in there, maybe you leave that in there. You know, just go with and if it's going to take 50 takes, it's easier to do those 50 takes than trying to convince 50,000 people why your song isn't just like everybody else's, you know.
Right.
So kind of like the Mutt Lang Phil Spector, like don't settle for second best, only because you already have the tools. If you have an audio interface with that you can plug your guitar into, you have some sort of drum keyboard that you can either program, write, perform drums, you know, you already have basically the same tools they had with Def Leppard's Pyromania. And if you have a vocal, then the magic vocal mic's not going to fix your performance. So get the performance up on par. And then from the Steve Albini point of view, just capture what's there to be captured. You know, don't if you can't bring like a electronic drum set to a gig, then maybe it's just smarter to record the real thing, you know?
Right.
Or whatever's not there to be reproduced live. Do I really need this? Is this me? Is this us? Is this a song?
Right.
Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, but it's very important to distinguish and do this sort of elimination that it's like, hey, this song sounds amazing with a 50-piece like gospel choir, but is it not going to sound good without it? So unless you're going to, it's going to change the logistics of the show quite a bit. So, and then just at the end of the day, if you run into a deadlock that you can't really figure out whether this ESP or this Ibanez guitar is going to sound better, just do something that, go record some Rain, go record some toilet flushes, just go stay creative. And sometimes like the stupidest thing can be like running with the devil. Van Halen, first Van Halen song that people ever heard, started with them just deciding that, hey, let's record every car in the studio's parking lot honking their horn.
That's right. Okay.
Is that gonna give you the platinum #1 record? Probably not. But is that gonna relieve some tension? Should there be any? Probably. And then some guys like Ron and Aaron, 40 years later, can talk about it, how they did that 40 years ago, and significance,
still.
And in that sense, like, think about it, when you're making an album, is anyone actually gonna care how you did it? Especially if it's just, it's just a preset, Sometimes, like, it works, but it's like, if you think of in terms of longevity, or like how many times I can tell the story, then, you might get into something that will stand the test of time. And I think that's about it. It's producer special is coming to an end, and hopefully you guys had a great time. And those of you who are going to enjoy your 4th of July, well, by the time this comes out, it's already done. So hopefully you had fun.
Hopefully you hydrate.
And absolutely, but not just with Miller Lite,
right?
Or whatever watery beer is your choice. Mine would be Miller Lite, but there's people who drink real beer.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just, all the craft beer tastes the same to me. I like Miller Lite.
Yeah, I wish I could do that, because Miller Lite's much cheaper than craft beer and all that. But I'm that guy. I'm that snob. I'll probably drink like the darkest beer in the hottest, weather. Just like yeah, no, I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Anywho.
Well, for we are many.
That is true. That is very true.
But yeah, I'll be recording some new episodes next weekend. I will be out there partying at my backyard rock fest, so we won't be recording a new episode next week. But as soon as we start releasing these, we should be putting up an episode on a weekly basis, and we should be having some special guests in the near future who is joining us on the next episode.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. I'm looking forward to it.
And the answer, instead of, would be Mr. Carl Sanders from the legendary Now. He's going to be joining us in the next episode, and should be a fun one. We're going to talk about touring. What is touring? Who not to piss off on the road and that kind of stuff. So,
right.
So I'm definitely looking forward to that. And yeah. So I will see y'all next time. And this has been another presentation of the Ugritone podcast. My name is still Ron D. Rock, and your name is still Aaron Cloutier.
That's true.
And I'll see y'all later.
See ya.
See ya.